And good morning, Common Sense America. We are back. It is about 9:35 a.m. Eastern Time. It's Monday, March the 27th. We are headed into April, and we are just rocking and rolling here this morning at Common Sense America. I am honored to bring over to the show Hal Weatherman. He is the candidate for Lieutenant Governor of the great state of North Carolina. Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Hope you are.
We're good. We're good. Thank you so much for joining Common Sense America this morning. And, I've known we met years and years ago when I had worked for an intern for Joe Pitts, and I remember Sue Myrick, and I remember that great revolution, and I remember her coming to Congress in '96. I was 18, freshman in college, and wanting to take over the Hill. And I remember meeting you years later, and I was reading some of your bio, and it brought back such memories of that time period when Sue was in Congress, when Pence was head, he was before he became vice president. You had all of those great leaders, and now you see Marsha Blackburn, who's now in the Senate. They all came through during that time period. What a legacy you got to be a part of for so long, and you were always behind the scenes. And I had to ask you, because I was asked this question when I ran for state house last year. You were always behind the scenes doing everything for all the leaders, and now you're running. What made you want to run? And I gave my answer. So my question to you is, what inspired you to take on this journey to be at the very forefront?
Yeah, I mean, I have been behind the scenes for all these years. Obviously, I worked for Congresswoman Sue Myrick, as you mentioned, was part of that class of '94,
Yep.
and told her I would give her 2 years when she recruited me to go work for her. And 27 years later, after working for her whole career, her whole congressional career, and then also her son, Dan Forrest, who's the
Yep.
former Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina, different last name, but biological son.
Mhm.
27 years later with one family, found myself, when Dan lost the governor's race, kind of searching for, what to do. I still had fight left in me, and really didn't know what, I was going to do. Did some consulting on the side during that time period, but it was really a kind of a family decision. My wife and I both, obviously knowing that Mark Robinson, the current lieutenant governor, was very open about his intentions to run for governor. We just talked about it that, why don't we do this? I've certainly had opportunities to run for lesser offices over the years, state house, state senate, even at one point thought about running for Congress myself when Sue retired, but just didn't feel led to do it. At each point, we got to the jumping off point, and I just said, I don't feel like I'm supposed to do this. And, but this time was different. We talked about it, and called some of Dan Forrest's former staff who worked with me over those years, talked it over with them, and to a person, we're all like, why aren't we doing this? And so we just, maybe about 10 weeks ago, jumped in the field. And our first thought was, let's don't even organize right now. Let's just be the first in the field and go see what the response is on the road. I'm a heavy grassroots campaigner by background. That's what I do. It's all I know. And I believe in it. And so we just hit the road, and now we're organizing as we go along. It's not our first rodeo. We've all been together for years. So I like to tell people, we're not building a band. We're getting the band back together in many ways all around the state, because we have pockets of people in all 100 counties. And but just felt led to do it. And, God has given me a tug at my heart that that's how he's always led me. I don't believe in leading by feelings, but God has always given me a burning desire when I wanted to do something, and or felt led to do something, and I always follow that. And this time I feel it, and I'm like, no, we should do this. And the response has been great, and I like it. I always loved working for Dan and for Sue,
Right.
but just to be honest, I love working for myself too. I get the same joy out of both. And I like meeting people. I like traveling the state. I like to think fast on my feet. I like to not know what the day holds. And I'm excited every day. I was up at 4 a.m. this morning. I get up early and am ready to go. And so, yeah, I've already traveled halfway across the state today. I'm actually headed to Western North. I live right outside of Raleigh, headed to Western North Carolina for an event later today. But
Yeah, I've noticed your campaign stops. And I love what you're doing with the grassroots effort. When I ran and also when I was running on campaigns, I loved meeting with the constituents. I loved hearing their hearts. I loved hearing what was very concerning to them, but also what they were passionate about for wherever they lived, especially in this state. And so I love seeing what you were doing. Tell me what you are hearing from the voters. What are you hearing from them? What are they excited about, but what are their concerns? What are the top three things that you keep hearing?
I mean, inflation, the high cost of living is just pervasive everywhere. It doesn't really matter where you are, urban or rural. The
Mhm.
more urban the areas, crime, really concerns about safety issues, be that crime on the street or, for instance, the need for SROs, resource officers in schools with
Right.
to protect our children. A lot of angst out there. Just with, I think they're looking at the greater world, um, and it really is driving my message as well. I'll kind of give you a scenario,
Yeah.
and this will kind of, when I talk about this, every head in the audience shakes. When
Mhm.
you start to see trains derail in strategic locations around the country, carrying strategic materials that in effect weaponizes the train when it detonates, when you start to see rolling blackouts in North Carolina, which we've never seen in my lifetime, and I'm 53 years old, when you start to see electrical substations be attacked in North Carolina and our critical infrastructure attacked, when you start to see foreign nations be allowed to come in, not
Mhm.
just our state but other states, and buying up our sovereign soil, which I'm smart enough to know could mean they're trying to manipulate our food supply, which has
Mhm.
national security implications. When you see China be able to fly a balloon, a spy balloon, over the great state of North Carolina, over every one of our military installations, every one of our nuclear power plants, and we as a people have to sit impotently by, it creates angst. And I don't think people can quite put their finger on what it is.
Mhm.
And so for me, it's driving a message that I set out to talk about anyway, which
Mhm.
is self-sufficiency. I
Mhm.
want our people to be self-sufficient, which is one of the reasons that I talk very openly about driving people into the trades, men and women, but to work with their
Yes.
hands, and
Yes.
the dignity of work. But my desire is for man to be self-sufficient.
Mhm.
Equal desires for our states, especially our state here in North Carolina, to be self-sufficient.
Mhm.
It really bothered me during COVID to watch our governor stand behind a podium day in and day out and literally beg the federal government or beg
Mhm.
a neighboring state or an NGO or a nonprofit for ventilators or
Yep.
masks or whatever the materials were. And
Mhm.
when I'm on the stump, I remind people we are the ninth largest state in the union, soon to be the eighth largest. We have a $25 billion budget, an $8 billion surplus, one of the largest GDPs in the world. Our state should want and beg for nothing. We should
Exactly.
absolutely be self-sufficient. And so, you know, it's more of a general angst. And I think a lot of it has to do with the current administration that's in Washington, has nothing
Mhm.
state other than people we're living with the ramifications of an out of touch government, and
Yes.
people are wanting to draw things closer to them. They want to draw their family closer, they're drawing their money closer to them,
Mhm. Mhm.
and that's a sign of uncertainty. And I believe the way you get out of that is to be self-sufficient, is to work
Mhm.
as people to make sure our people can stand alone, and make
Mhm.
sure the state can stand alone and
Mhm.
take care of itself. And like I said, the response has been really great. And so I know we're onto something there. And it's not new. I can look at other politicians
Right.
around the country that, in their own way, in their own words, are driving a very similar message. Greg Abbott in Texas,
Yes.
Ron
Yes.
DeSantis in Florida,
Yes.
Kim
Yes.
Reynolds in Iowa,
Yes.
Tate Reeves down in Mississippi,
Mhm.
Christy Nome in so
Yes.
many ways on medical freedom and things like that. And I think people are flocking to those states and
Yes.
flocking to that form of leadership, because what they're really hearing is, don't get caught up in the narrative that's cast by the left. The
Right.
media left. I mean, we know
Yep.
that they're going to cast
Yep.
these little buzz issues and try to get you onto those things as if those are the most important issues. And what I find is, if you can talk to at a much deeper level to what's really on people's minds and what's really in their hearts, you'll resonate with them. And then they say, I can't quite put my finger on it, but you
Mhm.
give me a feeling of security.
Mhm.
And what I think it is because we're preaching a self-sufficient message, which
Mhm.
it was what God put us here to be. So
Yes. Yes. Well, let's break that down for a second. Before you hopped on, I was looking on Twitter, and I always do hashtag North Carolina to see what the news of the day is. And it was our governor, who I just wanted to turn off, but I wanted to say, okay, let's listen, let's hear him out. And Morning Joe had him on talking about the Medicaid expansion and all the money that's coming from Washington. And he wanted to thank I call it the Biden administration,
yeah,
billions of dollars. And, I sat there and I said, no. And they kept criticizing the conservative Republican mindset. And again, that's just another example of taking money, having to be dependent on the federal government. That's
yeah,
not how this nation was founded upon. It was
yeah,
power back to the states.
yeah.
And that's exactly
Yeah,
my,
I'm
yeah,
100% against Medicaid expansion, and
yeah.
I tell people that it's not because I'm not sensitive to the needs of people. It's
Mhm,
not because I don't want a good health care. It's that it does the opposite. We already
mhm,
have a shortage of doctors. We
right.
already have, in effect, the makings of, you can see rationed care coming in the future because you have
Mhm,
too many people in line and not enough doctors to treat them.
right.
We're going to put roughly 600,000 able bodied men between the ages of 18 and 34 onto the rolls. We're going to incentivize private insurers to drop coverage and push people over on the public plan,
Mhm,
which is
mhm,
the opposite of what we should be incentivizing
mhm.
for the exact reasons that you're saying. We're
Right.
moving people from being self sufficient and pay as they go to moving them over to being on the public dole, which is never good.
Mhm, mhm.
I think that, the answer is not Medicaid expansion. The answer is market driven results. So, I believe in medical tort reform. My
Mhm,
college roommate is a doctor in Charlotte. Um, and we talk about medical issues all the time.
mhm,
He says, I don't know a doctor that doesn't practice defensive medicine, meaning you go in for a test, the doctor's
mhm.
relatively certain, yeah, this is good. We found it or we called it. And here's what you need. But he'll order or she will order another test. That second test is just to cover them legally
Mhm.
in the event that they were wrong, and it drives lawsuits. It just drives the cost of the whole medical system through the roof. And so that would be one. The fact that we have a porous open border
Yes,
contribute to our healthcare costs because
yes,
for the illegal alien,
yes.
the emergency room, which is the most expensive form of healthcare, is their primary provider of
Mhm,
healthcare, and we're paying for it.
mhm.
I think we should be able to buy insurance, medical insurance, across state lines the same way I can buy Geico insurance. If I want
Mhm.
to buy Geico insurance from South Carolina for my car, I can do it. If I want to buy it from California, I can do it.
Right.
I don't think there should be geographic boundaries to where I can get my healthcare insurance. Third party billing is really the root of all the problems,
Mm.
meaning, you
Yeah.
know, we aren't paying our bills. Someone else is paying our bills
Yes.
for us.
Yeah.
And, when the hospital tries to charge you $9 for an aspirin and you don't pay the bill, you're like, yeah, pay it. But when I'm paying the bill, I'm
Yeah.
going to look at it and say, nah, you know what? I'll wait until I leave here and I'll go to Walgreens and get it for 30 cents.
Exactly.
So, it's a combination of all things, but it really comes down to, the government control
Mhm.
or individual control. I'm a huge fan. There's not much I can do as lieutenant governor if I'm elected. There's some probably I could do, but not a whole lot because most of it's federal. But I'm a huge fan of healthcare savings accounts
Mhm. Yes.
where
Yes.
where we control our
Yes.
healthcare dollars and it grows. If we don't use it, if we don't consume it, it grows. It builds in the equivalent of equity. You can
Right.
borrow against it. I mean, just like you do in a house. And
Yes.
I'm a huge fan of that because then it will force the hospitals to be transparent
Mhm.
with the pricing and it empowers you. And again, if you really hear what I'm saying, it makes you self-sufficient. I
Yes.
want us to be self-sufficient in
Yes.
everything that we do. So yeah, I'm against Medicaid. And yeah, and I don't buy I get the federal government's going to pick up 90% and
Uh-uh.
we're going to pick up the 10% and there's
Uh-uh.
whatever $1 billion signing bonus and all that. I'm smart enough to know when they're printing money
Mhm.
like it's made on trees. I mean,
Right.
they're printing
Exactly.
money that at some point the bill's going to come due, and when it does, they're going to switch it over, put it on the state, and it'll absolutely cripple our state.
Yeah. Hashtag common sense. You and I both have
Um,
common sense, and we know that that's not going to be the case. Okay, let's talk about this. You do have power over the Department of Education for the state of North Carolina when you get elected as lieutenant governor. So talk to me about Department of Education and talk to me. I've heard some of your interviews, and I've read some of your pieces about abolishing the Department of Education.
yeah,
And, we have such social issues happening in our schools. We have the CRT, we have the woke agenda, we have the transgender, we have the pornography, we have all of those things. We have abuse in the schools. We
yeah,
see all these happening. And I'm in Carteret County, but neighboring to Onslow County. And I've heard so many stories. I've had parents come on here and talk about how their kids were victims of X, Y, and Z.
yeah.
And so, what are we doing from self-sufficiency, as you talked about? Power back to the people, we the people, where we need to stand up to school administrations, where we need to fight parental rights. Parents' Bill of Rights was just passed through Congress. So what are your thoughts on the education outline?
Yeah, well, the lieutenant governor of North Carolina serves either by general statute and or by state constitution, both
Mhm,
on the State Board of Community Colleges
mhm.
and also on the State Board of Education. So, he has some power. He's a voting member on both. So he has some power, but it's diluted by the voting. It's not like he's the superintendent of public instruction. But, I want to use that platform and that voting power as a voting member on both to drive school choice. And I'll kind of give you a holistic view of my view of education. I do believe the U.S. Department of Education should be abolished.
Mhm.
As lieutenant governor, I don't have the authority to do that. That would take
Right.
congressional action.
Right.
Um, but I do, not because I'm against education, but because I'm for education. I
Right.
want to abolish it and then do what's called block granting, where they send the money back down to the states. I'm even willing to accept what they're currently spending, not even cutting it, because automatically you'd put 25% more money back into the classroom because you cut out all the federal bureaucracy. I
Right.
also think you start the process there of severing the ties that bind us.
Mhm.
In other words, so many of these three-letter acronyms, CRT being one of them, I
Yes.
think are coming in part because they're federally funded
Yes.
and they're kind of invasive. They pass through the state and then it just kind of metastasizes and then it takes over. On CRT, I'll simply say this: we cannot, we cannot allow our black babies grow up thinking that they are born inherently a victim. And we cannot allow our white babies to grow up thinking they are born inherently oppressors and think that this country is going to survive. We
Yeah.
absolutely will not. And if you think about the civil rights movement,
Mhm.
our country we did unfairly judge people by the color of their skin in our
Mhm.
history. We did. But then we corrected ourselves and we
Right.
followed the lead of Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
And we started judging people not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
Yes.
But the woke agenda is now devolving backwards and
Yeah.
saying, no, we're going to start judging people by the color of their skin.
Mhm.
This is absolutely, completely backwards from what we inherently as people know to be true and right. We corrected a wrong, and now we're going to go right back again. And
Mhm.
it's dangerous. Yes, I'm very concerned with the sexualization of our
Yeah.
children. I have three kids.
Yeah.
One is in public school, two's in private. I should say this though:
Sure.
we are the ultimate consumers, my family, of school choice. We're the ultimate consumers of school choice. At one time or another, all three of my kids have been in public school, private school, parochial school, homeschooled, or charter school.
Mm.
There's not a form of education that we have not consumed, but the
Mhm.
decisions were made by mom and dad, me and my wife. And
Yeah.
that's the way it should be.
Yes.
And so, I'm for school choice because I think the saddest thing that can happen in our country right now is for the future success, the future outcome of a child to be
Mhm.
determined at birth because they had the unfortunate um, situation to be born in a bad zip code. And
Right.
that's exactly what non-school choice options do to them. They might be
Mhm.
trapped in a failing school system. And I do believe that education is the number one vehicle for advancement in
Yes.
this country because
Yes.
it empowers people. But
Yes.
back to the sexual, I'm very concerned with the sexualization of what they're teaching kids.
Mhm.
Just to be clear, drag queen story hour
Yeah.
is never appropriate at
Mm.
any age in a school setting. Our teachers should be teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, science, and the basics. And, in terms of, I think we need to retrain our teachers. And my wife is a former teacher.
Mhm.
But I think we need to retrain our teachers to where when kids come to them and they start asking questions about gender identity, gender fluidity, all of this stuff, that the teacher needs to be empowered to say, go ask your mother and father, and
Right.
then yield it and move back to the basics. And I think there would be, that would be a great move for our country to start
Right.
going back to the basics of empowering the parents. I agree with what the state of North Carolina, the General Assembly, was trying to
Mhm.
push, the state version of the Parental Bill of Rights, because I
Mhm.
think parents should have a right at all times to know what's being taught their children. And by the way, if they don't have that right, that's a huge red flag.
Yes.
Education should be transparent, and so, at the end of the day, I call it the backpack model. I want us to stop defending the system.
Mhm.
And I tell people when I'm talking to crowds, I just say, visualize that we have 100 kids here. If the school system's going to spend $10,000 per child per year,
Mhm.
stand every one of those kids up, unzip their backpack, and put the
Mhm.
10 grand in their backpack. Let them
Mhm.
go wherever they want with that money. Let
Mhm.
competition drive it. I'm a huge fan of charter schools.
Yes.
I've been on a board of a startup charter school at its infancy that now has 1,700 kids enrolled. By next year, we'll have 2,200 kids enrolled. It's the fifth charter school in my area in the last 5 years.
Mhm.
The waiting list on some of these schools are 1,500 and more, which is the greatest indictment of the school system, because there are parents literally trying to flee the schools.
Mhm.
And it's not because we're anti. I mean, I remind people, charter schools are public schools.
Yeah.
They're public schools, but they're not bound by all the regulations,
Right.
a lot of the strings that and have great curriculum control, and they teach at individualized paces.
Mhm.
And it's just a non-cookie cutter approach, and that's what people want.
Right. Talking about what this great state wants as we look to presidential, knowing, yes, you are running for a lieutenant governor, but talk to me a little bit about, as we went through COVID, we saw here in North Carolina what it was like to not be free in many ways. And I'll tell you a personal story that a lot of people in this audience know. I was brought on by the Trump administration during COVID, and I was told, report to Washington, D.C. on such and such time, when we were told not to look at one another, not to get within 6 feet of one another. And I was driving the 95 corridor from here. And I sit there and say, okay, North Carolina, and then you look at Florida, and then you look at, President Trump saying, all right, get up here, let's do this stuff. My question to you is, what if something like that could happen again? I mean, we all know that China is watching us very closely. We all know what is literally in our backyard. So my question to you is, as we see, the blueprint from the great state of Florida, from America's governor, and we see Abbott, we see Christine Nome, and as you take on this role, what would be some of your thoughts as, self-sufficiency during perhaps another COVID? Not trying to make it happen. I'm just saying something like that. How do we best prepare ourselves in
Yeah.
our counties?
Yeah, and it's a great question. The government never gives back what it takes, and the
Mhm.
government never gives back what you willfully give to it.
Mhm.
What scared me the most during COVID here in North Carolina was, under the guise of security or safety or protecting you, we willfully, we willfully gave up as people, um, many of our civil liberties. I never understood the science that said that Lowe's could be open, that Walmart could be open, that the ABC stores could be open, that the
Mhm.
abortion clinics could be open,
Yep.
but the churches had to be closed. I didn't understand the science. I didn't realize the COVID virus was so discriminating, that it could pick and choose which stores to infiltrate.
Right.
And so, that's my greatest fear. The time where civil liberties mean the most are
Mhm.
actually in times of crisis. That's
Mhm.
actually when you need them the most, and you need to be watchful of them. What scares me the most is that COVID I'm not saying it was deliberate, but could have served as a precursor to something far worse. Think of all the civil liberties that we willfully gave up, and or didn't willfully give up, or were
Right.
taken, or mandated,
Right.
so called, for something that most people have basically a 98 point whatever, 99% survival rate from.
Mhm.
Imagine when it is something that actually is a lot worse.
Right.
What is going to happen under the guise of safety and security? So,
Right.
you know, again, as I said earlier, one of my messages is I want to drive self-sufficiency for the state. One of the ways I would do that is I think we need a strategic stockpile, and this isn't just because of COVID. This would be because we're in a hurricane state, if for no other reason. You can
Yes.
put to the bank,
Yes.
we're going to have 1 to 2 hurricanes a year, and then if you
Mhm.
knew anything about North Carolina, if
Yep.
it blows inland from the coast and goes upstream, and there's rain on the western part of the state, you can take like clockwork. 3 days later, everything in between will flood. So we're both
Exactly.
a flood state and a hurricane state, and then you add things like COVID, or who knows what could come down the pipe,
Mhm.
man-made disaster. But we need to have a strategic stockpile, just like the federal government has a strategic petroleum reserve
Mhm.
in the event that our economy doesn't shut down when something really catastrophic happens. I think our states need to have the equivalent of that.
Right.
And so I would like to have a strategic stockpile of the most critical needs that we have. We
Mhm.
saw Moore County, North Carolina, shut down for a period of weeks because our
Mhm.
electrical substation,
Yes.
several substations were attacked. They still haven't solved that. Is that a precursor? Is that a
Right.
methodical? Is that a domestic terrorist group? Is it,
Right.
what is that? I don't know. But if the county itself had to basically shut down for several weeks because they couldn't replace the parts because the
Mhm.
parts were made overseas. One,
Right.
we need to start making stuff again in America. But
Yes.
in the interim, we should be doing a strategic assessment of all of our critical needs that could shut us down and stockpile them so that
Mhm.
we are prepared. I just think that's common sense.
Yes.
So I think that would help.
Mhm.
I think the General Assembly did take action, albeit
Mhm.
personally, I think a little too late after COVID. In this
Right.
last session, they finally did pass through a bill that would severely curtail the governor's
Mhm.
executive
Executive
powers.
power.
If
Mhm.
you remember during the 2020 race,
Yes.
I'm running Dan Force's race for governor.
Yes.
I'm his chief of staff in the lieutenant governor's office. We were the only council of state member to sue. We had to litigate. We litigated Governor Cooper, saying you're overreach. You don't have this authority.
Right.
We were unsuccessful. The courts were under, just to be honest, a little bit more partisan the other way back then.
Yes.
They've now since swung the other way. But we have to limit executive overreach. And if it has to be done by law, then it has to be done by law. And so I'm thankful that they finally took that step. But it didn't really help us during COVID, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I
Right.
just don't think one person, one man, or one woman should have that kind of unilateral authority, especially during a time of crisis. We
Yes.
don't live in a dictatorship. That's not who we are.
That's exactly it. I was just going to say the authoritarian mentality, the authoritarian regime. That's what it was like. Growing up in Pennsylvania, I saw the same thing happening under the regime up there, and then seeing it transfer down here. Final question before I let you go. Two things that stand out to me, having had this show since the end of last year and really talking to the candidates that are coming through nationwide and talking to the conservative mindset and the conservative values of the great state of North Carolina. One thing that really stands out to me is the fact that I had North Carolina Right to Life on here September, October of last year. And they really brought to the point that North Carolina is still a destination abortion state.
Yeah.
So, talk to me a little bit about what you would do, what you can do as lieutenant governor that would continue to save the lives of babies and take away that destination
Yeah.
for others to come to the state.
Yeah. Obviously, North Carolina allows abortion right now up to 20 weeks. Um, I believe life begins at conception,
Right.
and would like to see it outlawed all the way um, to conception. I
Mhm.
am a realist in the sense that we don't have a veto proof majority.
Mhm.
And we have a Democrat governor who is adamantly pro choice. I would like in this session of the General Assembly, while we don't have the numbers and we don't have the ability to override a veto,
Mhm.
I would like us to take it from 20 all the way down to 6, the
Mhm.
so-called heartbeat bill.
Mhm.
Um, and then hopefully have a Republican governor come in short order and take it
Mhm.
all the way down
Mhm.
to conception.
Mhm.
Look, I believe in life. You know,
Yes.
I believe in life, and so if we as a society will take the life of an infant
Mhm.
whose entire good is still ahead of them,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And it's a slippery slope to take the lives of the sick, the elderly, the
Yes.
disenfranchised, the infirm, whose better days might actually be behind them.
Right.
And so, you'll never do wrong by
Mhm.
doing what's right.
Mhm.
And, I would like to see us create a culture of life. The good
Mhm.
news is, I mean, if you look at, the progression and
Mhm.
science catching up with the Roe v. Wade decision, giving
Right.
them the
Right.
ability to now come back and say, actually,
Yes.
life, they're just proven what we inherently know to be true, that life begins at conception.
Right, exactly.
What I like is that the youngest generation, whatever they're called now, the Z's or
The Zers or whatever.
Z's, they actually are coming up very pro-life in the polling when you look at them, and I find
Mhm.
that very interesting. And
It is.
so I think it bodes well for the pro-life movement.
Mhm.
But I would go one step further as a conservative. I think we as conservatives have to start showing more compassion for the woman during that
Yes.
time period. So
Yes.
this is why Tate Reeves, by the way, Tate Reeves was the lieutenant governor of Mississippi prior
Mhm.
to being the governor. And the one thing he's done down there is he has expanded the definition of what it means to be pro-life. We are
Mhm.
going to surround that woman with love. We're going
Mhm.
to give her unlimited resources. We're going to do health clinics,
Right.
not to abort the child, but to make sure that she has the proper nutrition and can do everything if she comes from poverty. I mean,
Yes.
just to me, that's what it's about. I want to streamline the adoption laws in North Carolina. I want to streamline the foster care system in North Carolina. I
Yes.
want people to bring forth the child because I want them to bring them into a loving community that surrounds them.
Mhm.
And that starts with bringing a culture of life, the
Mhm.
sanctity of life. And that
Mhm.
starts with making these changes. But,
Mhm.
one thing I don't want is for us to, is to get so bogged down this session of, do we take it to 12? Do we take it to 6? Do we, keep the ball moving, keep moving the right direction because
Mhm.
we're headed there. It's a
Mhm.
horrible situation. It's a
Mhm.
horrible thing. The difference, by the way, um, between 12 weeks
Mhm.
and 6 weeks, the heartbeat bill is an additional estimated 25,000 lives you would save a year. So let's take it on down to that, and then
Let's
let's
do
work on
that.
the next step. While when we have the numbers in the General Assembly and we have a Republican governor, which I think we're going to have both, and we're going to have it in short order. We're going to have it in 2024, or January 2025.
Yeah, we have a great couple years ahead of us. I'm very hopeful to that. I just received the invite to Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson's official in April, and excited for you as well, sir. So I
Thank
look
you.
forward to supporting both of you.
Thank
And
you.
however the Lord leads you for such a time as this, let's do this. Let's take back this state. Let's take back this nation.
Thank
And where can we? I have been posting all over on social media. I know we can find you on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram.
you. Yep.
But where locally can we see you? I know you were just here at Carteret County Convention. I know you are making your way around the state.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
do you
We've
think
already we've already touched down, I think, in 49 counties already,
that's
and
fabulous?
we're on pace. We're on pace to 100 by the end of the first quarters, which we're almost there now. But
Mhm.
if you go to Hal Weatherman
Mhm.
for FORNC,
Mhm. Mhm.
so Hal Weatherman
Mhm.
FORNC.com, and go to my events page. I don't publish all my events,
Okay.
but I publish about 90% of them, and we do them in month increments. So you can see where I'm giving public speeches, and we're spread out all over the state. And we really do dart across the state, east to
Mhm.
west, east, north, south, everything,
Yeah.
and try to mix it up and not just try to start on one side of the state and go to the other. We're going back and forth so that we're equitable and fair to all the counties
Mhm.
as we campaign. So go there, and that's where you can see where I'm going to be, and come out and see me. I'd love to
And
see.
what do you need right now for the campaign? What are you needing mostly? Is it the donations? Is it support? Is it grassroots? What are you really looking for right now?
And I say this not as a blow off. First and foremost, I need prayer because I do think that so many of these things turn into spiritual battles,
Yes,
and
they do. Yes, they do.
so I believe in prayer, and I ask people that do pray to pray a specific prayer. Pray that God would bring me the people and the resources that I don't even know that I need,
Mhm.
and then to give me His wisdom to know what to do with them when they surface. I've
Mhm.
actually prayed that my entire career in politics. I've just never been public about it, but now I am. And then, of course, resources. donations are great. You can donate on my website if someone is so led.
Okay.
But, I want my campaign to be about people's aspirations and their hopes, not their fears and anxieties.
Hmm.
And the only way to do that is to go out and connect with people and to meet
Yes.
with them face to face. And that's the difference in our campaign. Like, we are purposely building a campaign from the bottom up. It's more
Mhm.
important that I hear what's on people's minds than for people to hear what's coming out of my mouth. I feel very led about that. Like, I'm supposed to go have ears to hear every conversation I have everywhere I go, from the janitor to the CEO, and
Yes.
look for ways to help. And so, but it takes money. It does take money. So,
Yes. Well, thank you for listening to We the People. That is so powerful. And that shows your integrity and faith for this run. So I am excited to have you here. Thank you so much, Hal Weatherman. Go to halweathermanfornc.com.